Robert Samuel Walker grew up as an unaffiliated Jew in the suburbs of Toronto until a chance online interaction with a Christian missionary changed his life forever. Today, he is a consultant for Jewish nonprofit organizations in the areas of fundraising, management, and education, and is a lecturer and educator. He lives in Toronto with his wife and 3 daughters. They're all yours, Robert.
I was going to say, thank you very much. That guy sounds interesting. Let's have him. All right, let's see. How do I do this here? Right here?
Maybe put the thing in
Oh,
your pocket.
Oh, like this?
See the connection?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You don't trip over.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. And that's going to be just I'll be able to see the audience there? Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us and just for joining us and for having me. Of course, Rabbi Grover. This is definitely weird for me. I've done in-person talks and I've done Zoom talks, but to sort of, I don't know if I should be looking here, if I should be looking here. This is a bit of a strange thing. So if I'm sort of looking around, it's, I'm not being manic. I just, trying to give everybody much deserved attention. So as Rabbi Grover mentioned in that wonderful introduction, which I couldn't have said better myself. Of course, I wrote it. But my name is Robert Walker, a little bit of, I suppose, biographical information. Excuse me. I grew up here in Toronto born and raised. Well, actually, I was born in Toronto, but raised in Richmond Hill. And I was there up until probably 17 years old. I went to the University of Ottawa. I was there for 4 years. I came back to Toronto after that and been there ever since. And that was, 13 and a half years now. So I guess I'll just jump in. So the talk today was, how a missionary brought me to Judaism. And it's a very interesting circuitous journey. So I suppose I'll just sort of jump right in and start with really my childhood. So as a lot of people often ask me, they say, Walker, what kind of Jewish last name is Walker? And I say, it's not a Jewish last name. My father is not Jewish. Of course, we joke that back in the old country, the name was Walkerwitz from Poland, and they changed it to Walker. But of course, it was just Walker. And so, I grew up as Robert Walker, in Richmond Hill, a Jewish kid with a non-Jewish father, a Jewish mother. And grew up very unaffiliated. In other words, I had a bar mitzvah, but really it was sort of, like the old joke, how do you, there's a shul and it has this rat infestation problem and they don't know how to deal with it. And so somebody says, I know, just give the rats bar mitzvahs and they'll never come. That's it. Oh, sorry. I'm stealing the rabbi's material here. Anyway, not here, Rabbi Grover is, wonderful rabbi and, very privileged to be here. So, certainly not the case here, I'm sure. He's chuckling. But anyway, the idea is that, I grew up in an unaffiliated home. My mother was Jewish, but like I said, I grew up like to say a coronary Jew. I was a Jew in my heart, right? I wasn't necessarily familiar with any of the, got a couple laughs, thank you. I didn't really know anything what it was to be Jewish. Forget sort of following any of the laws, but really I was very Jewishly ignorant, right? I couldn't tell you really anything about, what it meant to be Jewish, either in a religious or in a sort of a national sense, right? Anything about the Jewish people. And I grew up in Richmond Hill, and I kid you not, I went to a school called Pleasantville Public School, which was at the corner of Neighborly Lane and Easy Street. And it's interesting, up until 18, my entire life was in black and white. No, it's not true, but it really was. I went to Pleasantville Public School, and it was at the corner of Easy Street and Neighborly Lane, and it was this sort of very bucolic life, maybe not bucolic, but sort of very charming, very almost sort of just very easy, very... nothing really bothered. And I grew up in a home and an environment. My parents got divorced when I was, 8 years old. I remember it very vaguely. And my father moved away. I stayed in Toronto, but sort of I stayed at home with my younger sister, with my mother. And so we grew up, but in an unaffiliated home, but very much half Jewish. We celebrated the holidays with my father. My father had a Christmas tree. I remember it was the creepiest Christmas tree you've ever seen. It was something called a Douglas fir, and it was plugged in, and the eyes would come on, and it would sing these creepy songs. And I remember one night there was some electrical outage, and the thing started buzzing. It was the creepiest thing you've ever seen. Stuff of nightmares. But this was, the environment, I grew up. I was Jewish, but, we celebrated Christmas with my father. I a couple times went to church with my father. He was a very non-religious person and agnostic, but, it was more of a cultural experience. But then again, that's what my Jewish environment was too. We didn't talk about, God or Judaism or anything. That's sort of the environment. And when I was 16, 17 years old, started thinking about university, where to go. And, the pressure was very high on me as a child. My parents, when I was born, they put an ad out in the newspaper announcing the birth of Dr. Robert Walker. So the pressure was there right from the get-go. But I've proven to be a disappointment to them. I hope they're not watching, are they? No, I don't think so. Great. If you see anybody walk, or just I grew up, and like I said, I decided to go to university, and my mother must have been the only Jewish mother in the world who didn't demand that I stay at home. She said, "Go away to school, go away, you'll grow out of your comfort zone," because she knew me better than I knew myself, which was, if I had stayed in Toronto, I studied journalism. I wanted to go to Ryerson, but frankly, I would have gone anywhere. Ryerson is a great journalism program, but it would have gone anywhere, and I wanted to stay at home. But she knew me, and she knew that, if I had stayed at home, I would have gone to school, I would have come home, and that would have been it. There wouldn't have been anything else. And so they basically, forced me to go to university. They paid for my tuition, so you can buy that kind of loyalty. And I went away, and I didn't want to be there, and I was very homesick, and it was very difficult. But the truth is, it didn't take me long. It probably took 2 weeks for me to feel comfortable, in school. All of a sudden I was developing a social circle. I got involved. I started to go to the Jewish Student Association, the Hillel, and, really went to Shabbat dinners and, got to know people on the floor in my residence. And all of a sudden it was nice to be able to have that social atmosphere. And so I was, grateful that I did go away. But one of the first things that really hit me that, you remember campus or been to a campus, the way campuses are set up, every university, every college, is they all have a quad. They all have this central area, this fulcrum. At the University of Ottawa, was actually called, the fulcrum was a student paper, but they had this sort of core area where you would have club days, and really everybody would be congregating in this section. And I remember just being shocked the first time, Frosh Week or whatever it was, just seeing this constellation of clubs on campus, right? They had every conceivable club that you can think of, right? They had the Jewish club, they had the Muslim club, they had the Somali club, they had the right-wing club, the left-wing club, every club you could think of, every conceivable, hobby or trade. It was unreal, this complete constellation for every little thing. I make the joke they had saved the whales and shaved the whales, every club you can think of. But I think what was so shocking to me was it wasn't just a bunch of clubs, right? There certainly was. But I was 17 years old when I went to university, right? I'm not some boy genius. I was about to turn 18. But I was 17 years old, and I was a pisher, right? I didn't know anything. And I remember seeing these kids, some of whom were in first year, some of whom were only a year older than me, who were, standing up there and running the, young liberals and the young conservatives and the Campus Crusade for Christ. And I remember thinking, my gosh, there's people who take belief systems seriously, right? And it seems strange, but I had never taken anything seriously. I wasn't a class clown or anything like that. It was just that you sort of float through life, right? I went to school. I tried to get good grades, It was, I wasn't, a 99% student. I was a good student, mid-80s, right? And I had I had friends, but not too many. And I was involved in, in extracurriculars, but not too much. And I was social, but not too much. It was a very sort of, parv kind of, existence, very, very sort of, not too much, not too little, but sort of, like Goldilocks, right down the middle kind of life. And all of a sudden I get to university and I see and meet these people who take things seriously, deadly seriously. their religion, right, their political views, right, like I said, the environment, whatever it was sort of overwhelming to me. And that was really my first experience meeting people who were completely coming from a different milieu. I was the only kid on my floor with 40-something kids who was Jewish, and it was a weird thing to meet people. I remember one of the girls, one of 12 kids, is devout Catholic family, and I was the only token Jew. And again, I didn't know anything, and that was the first time. It was kind of a little embarrassing where people would ask me questions, right? I was the first Jew they ever met. And I'll never forget this Catholic girl. She told me about her teacher one day, just total off topic, telling me about her teacher, something, Mr. Goldberg. And I said to her, I said, Mr. Goldberg was probably Jewish. And she said, oh, really? What makes you think so? And it was so inconceivable to her. She didn't hop. She didn't conceive that Goldberg, I don't know, maybe Goldberg wasn't Jewish. Who knows, the last name. But the idea was I had to explain that Goldberg was a Jewish name. There was no concept of a Jewish name before. So these were sort of from rural, small town Ontario. And these were a lot of the people I was meeting. And, one of the ironies of life is that, because I went away to school, you're familiar with the term absence makes the heart grow fonder. So, I grew up in a school that was probably 30% Jewish and a street that was 30% Jewish. Half my friends were Jewish. And all of a sudden I get to Ottawa and all of a sudden I had to seek out Jewish life. And I did. And I went to, like I said, to Hillel events and this and that. And it was funny that it was because of that absence that made me seek out Jewish life. It made me seek out Shabbat dinners. It made me seek out, I even went to shul. I haven't been to shul ever before, really. And I started to do that. And so thanks, Mom. You created this monster. Just joking. Is she on this? No? Okay, fine. So the idea is, like I said, that's really what created that path for me. And so that was my university. In my first year, I started going to synagogue, once in a while. There was a professor on campus who would host Shabbat dinners, and I would go to his house. He was very, I believe he's still doing it, prior to COVID anyway. Second, third year, fourth year, I moved around the city. Eventually I went to Chabad in one of the years. I went to a different synagogue, and I was by the time I graduated, I was Mr. Jew, right? Mr. Jewish campus. I was involved I was, the vice president of the Jewish Student Association. I was doing this and doing this and doing this, and it was wonderful. And I graduated and I moved back to Toronto, and the plan was always to move back to Toronto and to work. And so I got a job in corporate sales, and I moved in with my father, who lived in Midtown then. It was downtown, so it was closer to live there. And so I started going to work, and I started to go to synagogue and sort of sampling different synagogues and watching tons and tons of stuff on YouTube, right? This is 2007. So YouTube was just this novelty at the time. It was only a couple of years old. So I'm just consuming Jewish content. And I remember when I'm taking the subway, if you've ever taken public transit, you meet all sorts of interesting people on public transit. And when you go downtown, you meet all sorts of interesting people downtown. And so again, this was another experience where I was getting outside my comfort zone. I grew up this kid in Richmond Hill, and this was my experience. And I go to university and I meet more people who are completely different than me. And then, I go downtown and I work downtown and I take public transit and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things, like I said, I was really growing at this point, in terms of my Jewish identity, trying to learn what it was to be a Jew. I was already, becoming a practicing Jew, right? I was already praying 2-3 times a day, growing. I wasn't totally keeping kosher, but I wouldn't eat milk and meat together. I wouldn't eat non-kosher restaurants. So it was definitely this sort of growth trajectory in terms of, becoming more Jewishly, familiar and aware. And like I said, I spent tons of time on YouTube. And if anybody's familiar with YouTube and how, frankly, any social media works, it's all built on algorithms, right? If you ever go and you ever wonder, geez, did Facebook hear me? Right? Does anybody ever say, how did Facebook know I say that? Listen, maybe Mark Zuckerberg is hearing our conversations, and I wouldn't put it past him. But a big part of social media is that they know what you search and what you like, because they want to keep your eyeballs on that as long as possible. And if you're searching for BMWs on YouTube, guess what? It's going to give you BMWs. But what I was searching was Jewish music and lectures and Jewish this and Jewish that. And so, of course, that's what it was giving me. And one day, I remember, I came across this video, and it said a rabbi debates a missionary, or whatever it was, a missionary debates a rabbi. And I remember looking at this, and of course I was familiar with the concept that, of missionaries and, the wonderful work that an organization called Jews for Judaism does, encountering missionaries. But I said, who falls into this stuff? Who does this kind of, this is, what is this all about? This has got to be a joke. So not a joke, but I said, I can't imagine it was like an hour long. I said, I can't imagine what an hour long video is going to be. So I watched this video expecting, I don't even know what I expected, but for some entertainment. And I always think, geez, how nice would it have been to have an hour where I could just kill time watching YouTube videos, right? Back before kids. But the reality was I watched this video, and by the end of the video, I was stunned. You just had to pick my jaw up off the floor because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's not, I was expecting this scenario where this missionary, almost a clownish figure, would come in there and say, believe in Jesus. I don't even know what I was expecting, and that would be it, and like, there's nothing to it. And it's not that I walked away thinking that, wow, that missionary made incredible argument. It was more, I think, that he made any argument, and he was constantly citing the Hebrew Bible, and he was constantly citing the Talmud, right? The oral law, the oral tradition of the Jewish people. He was saying, did you know Isaiah this? And did you know Jeremiah said this? And did you know the book of Micah says this? And Genesis this? And Leviticus this? And I'm saying, I can't keep up with this. He's throwing this, and did you know that the Talmud and, Sanhedrin says this? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this guy is not an idiot. He's not illiterate. He's not clownish. He knows exactly what he's talking about. And me, of course, being completely Jewish illiterate, I didn't know anything. I think 99%, not 99%, but I think the large majority of Jews can't cite a lot of the things he was talking about. And I thought the rabbi made good arguments too, but really, like I said, I walked away from that really with a big question mark. What I thought was an open and shut case, and I honestly thought it would be like a scientist debating a member of the Flat Earth Society, which, by the way, is a real thing. It's not a joke, it's a real thing. And you would think this is going to be a joke, and it wasn't. And there was something about this video, it wasn't about this particular video, but it was definitely, like I said, at the point in my life where I was just open, just like consuming like a sponge, everything, right? I wasn't married, didn't have kids, I just had a 9-to-5 job, right? This is even really before smartphones were a thing. This is 2007. So, I didn't have my work with me all the time. So I left work at 5 o'clock or whatever it was, and that was it. And so this consumed me. This video, and of course, what did I say about YouTube? It makes you look up another one, and then it makes you look up another one, and another one. And before you knew it, I was obsessed, right? If you look up sort of, obsessive compulsive disorder, it's not a joke. That's not even a joke at all. I am not exaggerating when I say that every spare moment that I had, I would be reading about this. I would go into chat rooms and read about this. And I would debate with the Jews and the missionaries, and I would watch videos, and I would get books, and I would speak to rabbis, and I would, I even once picked a fight with some missionary in the UK about something because I read something online. It was incredible. Like, again, I can't imagine I had once had that time, but this was just an obsession. And it got to the point where I don't even take this completely literally. Sometimes people say, I'm so hungry I could literally eat a horse. I mean this not figuratively, but literally, where there was not a 5-minute period, 5 minutes, think about that period, every single day when I was not thinking about where my soul was going to go when I died. Now, that's extremely morbid and macabre for a 21-year-old, 22-year-old to be thinking. But that's, for me, what it came down to. This wasn't an issue of, what kind of tax system is best, or what's my view on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? This was a political view. This was a question of what happens when I die. Because the missionaries posited, right, that if you die without believing in Christianity, the central tenets, you die without atonement, right? You Jews used to have a temple and you read half of Deuteronomy, Leviticus, slaughtering. And they weren't all sin offerings, but a lot of them were. And they say, you slaughtered, back in the day, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would slaughter these animals for atonement for you. Well, what do you have now? You don't have any blood atonement, do you? Right? Again, we'll talk about what the Jews say. They say, well, we have a blood atonement. You have to believe in the Messiah. So they were very deadly serious about this, and it freaks you out. How does that not freak you out, right? There was a documentary years ago, probably 15 years ago, more than that maybe, called Jesus Camp. And it was about these Christian fundamentalist summer camps. And it was an interesting thing. If you look it up, it was an interesting how these kids, it was a big part of the indoctrination, if you want to call it that, scaring the hell out of these kids, so to speak, and it was just petrifying, right? And again, there wasn't a moment I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I don't even know how I remained gainfully employed. I remember my boss caught me. All I was doing is reading this stuff. And it was incredible. There wasn't a 5-minute until one night, there was a period when I just basically threw up my arms and I said, I can't do this anymore. if you're familiar with something called Pascal's wager, Blaise Pascal, he was a French philosopher, and he basically posited that, think of a grid, right? If you believe in God and you're right, you win. You're close with God forever. If you believe in God and you're wrong, you haven't lost anything and you've lived a good moral life. If you don't believe in God and there's no God, you haven't lost anything, but you haven't lived a moral life. But, this is again Blaise Pascal, right? But he said, if you don't believe in God and there is a God, then you're in trouble, right? I once saw a bumper sticker and it said, you know, if you're living your life as if there's no God, you better be right. It was fire. It was very weird, but nonetheless, this is really how I approached it. And I said, listen, Judaism doesn't believe in hell, which is not quite true. I didn't know at the time, but Judaism doesn't believe in a hell, and Christianity does. So basically, in the word, sort of to paraphrase Blaise Pascal, better safe than sorry, right? I might as well just Pascal's wager. I might as well just believe in this. And if I'm wrong, no harm, no foul. And if I'm right, then, I've saved myself. Correct. Yeah. Christianity. So there was one night, I remember it so vividly. I was basically in bed and I closed my eyes and I started crying. And I basically said to God, okay, I believe in Jesus. I'm a Christian now, right? Now, wow. It was weird. It was to think about that time, like this was, and it's weird for me I've done this lecture, 6 times now, 8 times. I haven't done this millions of times. It is still so weird and uncomfortable for me to say this, and unpleasant to say this. Like I said, I say this because I think there's a powerful lesson, but it's a very unpleasant thing for me to share this. It's so deeply personal, but that's what I did. Now, I remember also saying, okay, I'm going to save myself, but think about this. But I'm not going to convert to Christianity. I'm not going to, my mother, who is not religious, right? I couldn't do that to her. I couldn't do this to my family, right? So I'm not going to be out with this, right? But I also said, well, I'm not going to what am I going to do? So I'm not going to become a Christian and, get married to a Christian and raise Christian kids. I'm not going to do that. Go to church. No, I'm not going to do that. But I also, how can I, good conscience, do nothing? I don't know what to do. So I basically, that's what I decided. I said, you know what, that night, I'm going to pledge this, I'm going to believe this, and I'm still going to spend the rest of my life searching for this. But it means if I get hit by a train, God forbid, tomorrow, then at least I bought my insurance. And I woke up the next morning and I put on my tefillin, as I did every day, and I prayed and I went to work wearing a kippah, as I did. And so if you had met me, you would have seen this guy, right? Because like I said, I was growing and I was becoming more observant and I was sort of becoming more, sort of Jewishly connected. And that's why, YouTube had sent me this video had suggested this because it was Jewish. And this was the life. And so for about probably... Sorry to interrupt. Were these missionaries? Yeah. Were they Messianic Jews? Because you haven't mentioned. Oh, okay, fine. Was this Jews for Jesus? So Jews for Jesus is one, and I certainly can get into more details. This was Jews for Jesus is one organization, but these were Messianic Jews, or this video was a Messianic Jew. Now, what a Messianic Jew really is, it's essentially, the theology is. Sounds like what you were. You became a Messianic Jew because you were observing. I guess so. You had a. It's weird. I've never even thought about that before. I was like, no, I wasn't a Messianic Jew. I was just a Jew who decided to believe in Jesus. So I was like, I guess I was. It's weird. I never thought of myself in such a way. It's a weird thing because I didn't go to church. I never went to church. I didn't pray this was just this thing. I was like, okay, perhaps they would have said, oh, your heart wasn't really in it, but my heart was in it. Right? I was petrified, right? So, and, people do all sorts of things in life, religion and not out of, for all sorts of fear, all sorts of reasons. What's going on there? Okay. There you go. I'm getting to the good part. Don't worry. So essentially, this is how I lived. Oh, and by the way, this period was probably about 2 years. 2 years of my life was basically nonstop torture, where every minute of every day I was thinking, what if that wasn't good enough? Do I really believe this? Did I basically just say, okay, God, that's what I believe that, but did I really believe that? In other words, you understand, 2 years of my life, every waking moment, you know, and I remember it was obsessive. I was looking for signs everywhere. I remember thinking, you know, if a car goes by right now, that means, you know, this is right. If, you know, if it's sunny outside, it was ridiculous and no basis.
Reading the New Testament.
So I was reading online, everything, right? I was reading, you know, the Jewish quotes online and the Christian quotes online. But what was interesting was it wasn't the New Testament that I obsessively read. What I obsessively read was, because interesting, and we'll get into this, what the Messianic Jewish claim is. When I say Messianic Jewish, it's basically Protestant Christianity, evangelical Christianity with a Jewish lens. Now, probably most self-described Messianic Jews today are not necessarily Jewish, right? You might have people who are, you know, Filipinos who say, I'm a Messianic Jew. And then what do they mean by that? Is they mean Christianity got too sullied by Roman paganism. I want to reconnect to the authentic Judaism. And so you have, you know, even in Toronto, you have maybe half a dozen Messianic churches, and majority, my understanding of these congregations are non-Jews. Now, there are also many Messianic Jews out there. There's probably 200,000, 250,000 Jews who have converted to Christianity over the last generation. But that's distinct from, you know, Christians or Gentiles who describe themselves as Messianic Jews, which basically means I'm a Christian, but I really want to get back to the core teachings of Jesus and sort of without the, you know, the trappings of, Christmas and sort of things, which really, you know, later pagan, whatever, you know. So, but the claims of Messianic Judaism or sort of evangelical Christianity was Jesus isn't just some guy, right? This wasn't a debate between Jews and Hindus or Jews and, and Sikhs. This was an argument. They're not saying he's the Messiah. They're saying he's your Messiah, right? They're saying open up the Bible and he's in there. Open up the Talmud, the Gemara, the Mishnah, he's in there. That's the key difference, right? They were debating, like I said, they weren't just pulling this book and saying, you know, here's something from 2,000 years ago that's claiming this is true. They're saying your religion says this. And when they quote Rabbi Akiva, what do you do? How do you acknowledge that? So basically, I think for me,
Everyone understand that? I think that's a really key point. Repeat, Lisa.
Okay, so basically the claims of evangelical Christianity, Messianic Judaism was, you know, the Christian claims, you know, Jesus and everything surrounding him, right? It's not just a random argument like we would have with the Hindus, because with the Hindus or with the Sikhs or with Buddhists, we have no mutual ground. We have nothing in common, right? Epistemologically, we don't even understand how do we know is true, right? Well, there's nothing mutual that we have here. But with Christianity believes that God created the world, and that Adam and Eve were created, and that Moses led the Jewish people out of Egypt, and the 5 books of Moses are divinely inspired, and Isaiah was a prophet, and Jeremiah was a prophet, and Ezekiel was a prophet, and the second temple, when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, slaughtered, you know, the atonement sacrifice, the sin atonement, that brought atonement to the Jewish people. They believe 100% that God created the Jewish people to be the light unto nations, etc., etc. They believe 100% that. So what they say is that he fulfilled that. That's their claim, that this isn't just some random theology.
The intention is that if you accept the Bible as authoritative, that must lead to faith in Christianity, right? That's the idea of the Old Testament and the New Testament,
right?
The Jewish Bible lays the foundation for Christianity. That's what's challenging for him, is that he says they used my own, the things that I valued most, they used against.
Right. They weren't trying to say you're wrong. They were saying you're just not fully right yet. Right. You haven't completed it. So you've heard the term, sometimes they use the term fulfilled Jew, complete Jew. According to them, you know, we're Jews, you know, but ultimately we've got 80% of it, 70% of it, whatever it is, but we haven't finished it. We haven't gotten the most important thing, right? And like I said, that's really where the core, the nut of this is that they point to our Bible. And depending on the Messianic website that you read, you know, some of them, I don't recommend, I'm not recommending that you do that, but they have various levels of, you know, how many proof texts, how many prophecies in the Hebrew Bible they claim point to Jesus. Some say 100, some say 300, some say 800. I guess it depends on how you interpret. But they basically say that the Hebrew Bible, to say nothing of the Talmud, right, the oral law, is chock full of hundreds and hundreds of sources which all point to Jesus. Now, this point in my talk, I sort of, maybe Rabbi, you can tell me, I'm happy to jump into a little bit, finish my story before getting into the reasoning behind my change, or do you want me to get into the reasoning and then we'll talk about my end? This is where, I'm sort of, do you want me to get into like the nuts and bolts of like how I came to deconstruct their argument for me, or do you want to get into sort of what happened with my life?
What happened?
Okay, fine. So I'll get into that. Fine. So basically, I mean, this, what happened at this point was I lived for 2 years in a state of constant torture, wondering if I was going to die, if I was going to spend eternity in hell. This is how I spent 2 years of my life. I woke up, I went to sleep, and everything in between, I was living as a religious Jew. People were introducing me. Rabbi said, can I introduce you to this lovely? I said, please do not introduce me to anybody, because the last thing I was going to do was, have a Jewish family and hide this for the rest of my life. So I didn't know what I was going to do. I was basically going to bring this to the grave with me, right? And it's hard to articulate just how absolutely torturous this was, to the point where it was.
Did you ever mention this to anybody else?
No, nobody. My father didn't know. My mother didn't. They're not on the call. No, nobody in my family knew. Nobody in my family knew. There was no. I didn't share this with a friend. Nobody at all. Right? This is a time I was borderline like.
Because of shame.
It was shame. It was fear. It was embarrassment. It was confusion. Like, who was I going to talk to? Was I going to talk to? None of my friends would understand what I was talking about. I remember when I was a kid. We went to synagogue, we went a couple times a year. We were sort of active shul goers, but I remember when I was a kid, I was interested in already Jesus. How could you not be, right? It's a big cultural, so to speak, figure. And I remember my mother, to her credit, she brought me in, and I met the rabbi and I asked all these questions. I don't remember, I was 7, 8, 10, 12 years old, whatever it was, because of course, a natural question here, right? As probably it would be if we were in a Muslim country, why don't we follow the majority here? We're a little bit different. Why is that? We're very different. And so at this point, it was extremely lonely. It was extremely depressing. And I think that, I definitely had suicidal thoughts at the time, but I think what kept me from pursuing those was frankly the concern about what would happen to me if I had followed that. But I remember driving on the 401 one day and thinking like, what would happen if I just drove into the median? Like, this is how, like, I couldn't live like this. When I was 20 years old, lived 65, 70 more years. It was, Yeah. I don't even think my wife fully understands how torturous this was. And like I said, I try to articulate this. It's hard for me to explain just truly how dark it was. But I think for me, what was the process in getting out was I kept looking. Like I said, I would spend days debating these proof texts and trying to understand everything. Because like I said, they looked and they said, this is in your Bible. So I said, well, I'm going to read my Bible cover to cover, and I'm going to try to understand everything I possibly can and try to understand what the core of this is. But what I noticed about their proof texts was a few things. One is that they were very unclear. In other words, I'll give you, one proof text, for example, in the book of Leviticus, they say that there's a said where you can't consume blood. There's a chapter in Leviticus talks about you can't consume blood. And it said, because it's blood that gives atonement. And they say the blood that gives atonement, There you go. What blood do you have? Oh, yeah, the sacrifice is 2,000 years ago, and we have blood, but what do you have? Now, we would say, or what the rabbi said was interpreted very differently, and they say, yes, it was the blood in the sacrifices that provide atonement, but this entire passage is talking about the prohibition of consuming blood, because you can't drink blood because it has a very specific role in the altar. So in other words, every verse I read, and it's interesting, if you look surrounding verses, it's talking about consuming blood. So consuming blood, and in the middle, it's about atonement. So I remember thinking, gee, this is weird. And you saw it again and again and again. There's a chapter in Isaiah, or a couple chapters in Isaiah, a few, talking about a suffering servant. They say, it's somebody who's going to suffer on behalf of the world, right? And the Jewish people have historically interpreted as the righteous remnant of Israel. We have suffered for the world, right? They say, well, you know who that sounds like. But if you look at the surrounding verses of Isaiah, it's all talking about Israel, 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 maybe Jesus, Israel, Israel, Israel. And I remember thinking, this is happening again and again and again. It's very strange that you have to interpret theirs in a very specific way, that their verses were inconsistent. In other words, they would show one verse, but then I could say, but there's also 3 or 4 verses elsewhere that, for example, Isaiah says, I don't want your sin offerings. They're a disgrace to me. I want good deeds and prayer. So I say, okay, but how do I understand that? In other words, they point to one verse, but the rabbis would always point to 3 or 4 other verses that said the opposite. And they would point to one verse, but the thing was, the surrounding verses said something different. And so you notice that the proof text...
You understand that we could say the same thing about Jewish interpretations of the Torah and the Tanakh.
In what sense?
We also take verses completely out of context and reinterpret them and, come up with interpretations from particular verses that don't make any sense at all, given the context of where the verse is found.
For sure. So there's 2, I mean, obviously without getting into that, but in Jewish, as you know, I'm not talking about sort of different levels of interpretation, pshat and remez, and sort of different, levels of interpretation, right? Because the Talmud will quote, as you know, much more learned than me, the Talmud will quote a line and you say, well, that's not what it's talking about, right? So the Talmud has a very often fanciful, very educational way. I wouldn't say fanciful is maybe not the right term, but when you see that in Jewish, exegesis, you see it's often in a creative way, but it does not mitigate or negate the initial pshat, the initial superficial plain reading of the text. But what you saw here was that what they were doing is that they were reinterpreting the plain interpretation of the text. In other words, we would agree with Christians, there's many layers to every verb, every word of the Torah. If we believe it's written by God, it's more than just a plain, this is a word for all generations. But the difference was, when they pointed to a quote and it said, the suffering servant, suffers on behalf of the world, and they say it's because that's Jesus, and we say, no, that's Israel. How do you figure it out, right? You could read it either way. As a layman, how do I know what the difference is? So I think there's a number of ways to interpret that. One is consistency. Where else in the entire Bible do we see a suffering Israel or a suffering servant? Turns out you see throughout the Hebrew Bible the Jewish people suffering and the righteous remnant suffering. You see that within the surrounding chapters in Isaiah that the Jewish people suffer, and the Christians agree with that, right? They say, yes, Isaiah 51 is talking about Israel, Isaiah 52 talking about Israel, Isaiah 54 talking about Israel, Isaiah 55 talking about, but Isaiah 53 is talking about Jesus, right? So they would acknowledge, they don't dispute our macro interpretations. They say, but that's all wrong, this is what's right. So they were inconsistent in that sense. They were unclear. In other words, their core theological claims were never actually spelled out in the Bible. It doesn't say, you must believe in the Messiah to receive atonement. They have to sort of come at it in a very indirect way, right? It doesn't say, only blood brings atonement. It said, in the temple, blood brings atonement. Nachon, see the difference there? So in other words, what they would say. Okay, go ahead.
Because I find this part really interesting.
Okay.
Just continue with your
story.
Fine. What happened?
Well, basically the story here was essentially, this is how I was studying and spending and just, like I said, without sort of going and beating a dead horse here, this was my life and essentially spending 24 hours or every waking hour evaluating and measuring this and studying and praying and doing everything I possibly could, looking for signs in every conceivable way. Until one day, I would say one day, it was a longer process. Like I said, there's a sort of a climax. It's a weird story because you have this story, but it sort of never quite ends, which was, first of all, Judaism does believe in a hell, and it was the question of, Gehenna, which was, well, geez, according to Judaism, if I walk away from God and I believe in a being who is distinct from God, certainly as Jews see it, well, that's idolatry. And if you open up the Hebrew Bible, God does not look kindly on idolatry. And it's interesting, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, the Bible says almost nothing, virtually nothing about the afterlife. Now, does that mean they didn't believe in the afterlife? You want to take that chance, Rob Walker, that the Jews, that there's no afterlife just because God doesn't talk about that? But God spends every other word, if you sacrifice your children to Moloch, right? It's an abomination. I'll cut off your son. It's like, geez, that's pretty serious stuff. So if this idolatry is serious stuff, and that's idolatry, then geez, I don't want to risk that either. So all of a sudden, the whole house of cards coming down, which was, this isn't a zero-sum game, taking out an insurance policy, better safe than sorry, because you know what? Both these claims say you better be right. So what do you do? And like I said, it all came down to these quotes. Again, we'll get into that, inconsistent, unclear, indirect, vague, so on and so forth. And I think there was a point, spent many, many hours with Rabbi Skolback here in Toronto of Jews for Judaism. If you're listening, a wonderful organization. I corresponded with a rabbi in New Jersey, and he gave an entirely different, because most of the Jewish interpretation or the Christian-Jewish polemic was the Christians give a quote, the Jews, rebut that quote, and that's it. Christians, here's a quote. No, the Jews say this. Here's a quote. You go mad. But what this rabbi, his name is Yisrael Chaim Blumenthal, and he lives in Lakewood, New Jersey, and he basically wrote this incredible just book after book, basically reframing the whole thing. He said, why do they just throw argument after argument after argument after argument? We have to respond to each one, right? You don't have to respond to every argument. You can have 100 arguments, but if they're all bad, it still equals out to 100 bad arguments. This is what he was saying, is that sometimes, and I remember that resonated with me, because when I watched that video 3 years earlier, I remember thinking, this guy's throwing quote after quote after quote after quote. And if you ever watch political debates, you see that's what often happens. The guy just throws 100 things and the other guy can't respond. So who wins the debate? The guy who throws 100 things out there. But meanwhile, it's a lot easier to throw things out. And I remember thinking, yeah, that guy threw this quote out and this quote out. But hold on, it doesn't mean he's right. Maybe these were all, for all I knew, these quotes could be made up of thin air. I mean, they weren't. But didn't mean he wasn't grossly misinterpreting them. In other words, just throwing 100 quotes at him, doesn't mean that any of them are right. But what this rabbi said was, that whole argument is garbage. He said, how do they know? What do we have in common, Jews and Christianity in common, right? We both believe in God. We both believe in God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that God brought the Jewish people out of Egypt, that, the 5 books of Moses and the entire Bible is inerrant. And there's a bumper sticker, you don't see so much in Toronto, you see it in the States, it says, God wrote it, that settles it. No, God wrote it, I believe it, that settles it, right? This is written by God. However, was it verbatim? Was it inerrant? Was it inspired? But the idea was that, a huge percentage of certainly evangelical Christians, but the vast majority of evangelical, I'm sure, believe that God inspired this. And so if the Jewish people and the Christians agree on this, then how do we know the Bible is inerrant? How do we know the Bible is to be believed in the first place? Who wrote the Bible? I don't mean God. Who actually wrote the Bible? Oh, well, the Jews. But how do we know that Isaiah was a prophet? How do we know Isaiah was a prophet, but Tobit wasn't? Tobit and Judith and Maccabees are books that never made it into the Jewish Bible. Interesting. These are books from 2,000 years, never made it into the Jewish Bible, right? So how do we know that Isaiah was a prophet, but, Jimmy wasn't, right? How do we know that Tobit wasn't a prophet, but Ezekiel was? It's because the rabbis told us that. This tradition came from the rabbis predating Christianity, right? The Jewish leaders. How do we know when you open up the Tanakh, the Bible, that an aleph and a beit is pronounced like an aleph and a beit? How do we even know that? How do we know anything about Judaism? How do we know anything about the Bible? It's because there is a tradition that has been passed down from the Jews, the Pharisees, right? Today we would, rabbinic Judaism, right? The Pharisees, the ones who believed there was an oral law. Because of course there's an oral law, because we don't even know how to pronounce the Bible. How do we know who was a prophet and who wasn't? He basically reframed the whole thing, which was Christianity knows that the Jews had this tradition. But what they're claiming is that the Jews knew who the prophets were, and they didn't make any mistakes, that the Jews could interpret and could transmit this Bible perfectly without a single error from the beginning of time, from the beginning that they ever had this tradition, that they got everything right, and we believe everything about them. But up until the point Jesus came, they completely forgot everything. They didn't know everything, and God blinded them, and they completely lost any ability to have any of this at all. And I think for me, that struck me as just completely monstrous. Because if there is a God, and God loves us, which Christianity and Judaism both purport to believe, then what the Christian claim is that Jews were right all along up until this point, and the entire Jewish people, the vast majority of Jewish people, were completely blinded by God, completely superficially blinded. And even though we strive and we learn and we pray, doesn't matter. It's basically foregone conclusion. And I thought that is completely and utterly monstrous. Hitler was not that bad, Yimach Shemo. Hitler killed people. He took a few years off their life, 20 years, even, God forbid, killing a baby, taking 80 years, 90 years off their life. But they're telling me this God gives us free will, gives us the ability to understand, gives us the ability to seek, to question, to pursue truth and knowledge in the world, you acknowledge the Jewish people had absolute truth with a capital T. We had God's truth, and yet, until this point, God basically pulled the wool over our eyes and said, I'm going to cast you off forever, ever, and ever. That interpretation of God is infinitely worse than Hitler. And I said, that's it. I'm sorry, this is an extremely harsh thing to say, but as far as I was concerned, that was it, because any God that would do that to anybody, let alone to the people that he gave this tradition to and this truth to that you also believe, it's impossible. Beyond all the proof texts, which were, inconsistent and vague and ambiguous, which 80% of contemporary Christian scholars don't believe. And I remember then I started to read about Christian scholars. None of them believe these proof texts either. They believe, of course, that in, the Christian Bible, the New Testament, interpreted in like almost the Talmud did, that they didn't really believe that Isaiah was talking about Jesus. They believe they took this and they interpreted it in their own function, right? So they didn't really believe that he was talking about that. And so when I read all these Christian contemporary, evangelical Christians with PhDs teaching at evangelical Christian universities, mostly in the States, but all really around the world, saying this text doesn't mean this text means this. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. Their own people don't believe actually the core tenets of their proof texts. And like I said, it was both the proof text coming down like a house of cards. It was, three things. It was a proof text coming down like a house of cards. It was the understanding that this isn't a zero-sum game, that in Judaism, God spends a lot of time talking about how terrible idol worship it is. And if this is idol worship, then I don't want to take a chance what that's going to mean for me. And the third component, like I said, was just reframing the whole thing, which was, why do I have to respond to 300 bad arguments? Because the vast majority of them they're not good. They're just completely, any grade 8 kid reading it could see that that's not the context it's talking about. It's a cherry-picked verse in a context talking about something completely different. And those three things, I think, together came down like a house of cards. And it was just this breath of fresh air, which was just like, I walked out of this dark period of my life with this sense of clarity and sense of purpose, a sense of gratitude that I was able to come out of this. And of course, like I said, with tremendous gratitude to the people, to the two rabbis who helped me, get through this. It was, Rabbi Skobach and Rabbi Blumenthal. And of course, there were many other people, I'm sure, along the way, but those were really the two who helped me engage with this, because so few Jews are familiar with this, can respond, right? Because who spends the majority of their time? Very few. And so I came out of this, and that was that's the story. And I think for me is, when I talk about, how a Christian missionary brought me to Judaism, of course I was born a Jew. In fact, there's some guy online, some Christian evangelical in the state, who found my video where I did this talk a couple years ago, and he spends like 300 words describing, or more than 300 words, how I'm wrong. Robert Walker says he was, converted by a Jew, but now he really wasn't. Let's examine his story. And it's so funny. This guy's like picking apart my YouTube video. It was just sort of funny. But the reality is, for me, yes, I was born a Jew. And yes, I was, like you said, if you looked at me, if you were a superficial observer, nothing changed. I was a Jewish kid who grew up, who went to university, who started getting Jewishly involved, and nothing was different in my life this whole period. But like I said, so first, obviously, appearances are deceiving, but for me, it gave me an incredibly different perspective on life, right? My understanding, if you go to the gym, I've been in the gym once, I'm never making that mistake again, but my understanding is, if anybody can correct me, if you go to the gym, if you want to build muscles, you don't pick up the 1 pound ones, right? The lighter, dumbbells are for toning, but you really want to build muscle, you pick up the big stuff, right? You have to, no pain, no gain, right? This trial by fire for me made me evaluate and question things I never thought I would need to question. Like I said, it was like watching the Flat Earth Society. That's what I thought of. I never thought that I would have to be engaged and asking these questions and praying and, and basically every moment of every day, basically, I can't even put it into words how I felt. It was because of that video that made me do that. Now, of course, do I wish I never saw that video? I think I'm glad in retrospect that I saw it, because at the time, not that I would have been ignorant, but it made me go to the gym and pick up those 1,000-pound dumbbells for 3-4 years. It made me question and pray more than I ever thought, with the deepest, tears that I ever would have had, right? it taught me how to pray, right? That taught me how to read. That taught me how to question. That taught me how to, evaluate and question every little element of my life, right? And if it weren't for that, maybe it would have gone there. And so my hope and blessing is that we can all get to a point, that same point, but without going through that process, right? Without going through that pain, without going through that suffering. I think that the point in life is for us to be able to grow and to be able to connect to the Almighty, to connect to the eternity. But I had to go through that for whatever reason through a very torturous path. The path that God had given me was through this pit. For whatever reason, that's the path I went through. And like I said, as a result of that, I came out of that with a deeper, more, I think, sophisticated, more appreciative understanding of what it meant to be a Jew, of what life was about prayer, about everything. And like I said, if it weren't for that, I don't know what it would have been. So in that sense, that Christian missionary made me a deeper, more committed Jew today than I would have been otherwise.
Very good.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so now I'm gonna.
Can I take this off?
Now I'm gonna attack you.
All right.
No, now we're gonna have a conversation, and you can keep it on.
Okay,
Just
fine.
make sure let's keep distance between us, because there's a couple of points in your talk that I want to unpack. Let's just make sure that we're okay. There we go.
All right.
First of all, just a point of clarity. I always get uncomfortable with Nazi comparisons, and you made one at a certain point in your talk.
Okay.
I think what you were trying to say with the Nazi comparison was that, here, give me the mic for 1 second. Let's just put it between us. So just for clarity, the Nazi comparison, I think you were trying to say, was the cruelty of a God that would take away his special relationship with the Jewish people that had existed for 1,000 years or more. That was what pained you.
I think that's part of it, but I think that the bigger part for me was changing and breaking his word is one thing. But what was so much worse than that was, like I said, that God would condemn babies to hell for eternity for believing the wrong thing. Right? That a sincerely believing person, for a fault of not getting the answer right, would be condemned to hell forever. Whereas the worst monster we can think of, Pol Pot, Hitler, Mussolini, murderers and dictators and mass killers, they killed people, and not to make light of that,
yes.
What did they do? They took somebody's life away for 80 years. But what this God, according to that theology, did is killing people and torturing them forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. We cannot conceive, no person in the world has been that evil. You understand? Like, that's what I
Now
mean.
I understand.
Yeah.
So your point was that you couldn't believe in a God that would send everyone to hell who didn't get the answers right, including the Jewish people.
It's both those answers together.
Right. Okay.
It's that, and then Kol Homer, all the more so, doing that to his people that he claimed that he had a personal relationship with, and who possessed God's absolute truth.
Okay.
So it's both those together, which, and like I said, and as a third point, Christianity claims to have this loving God, but if you get the answer right, then we're going to put you in a boiling pot in hell forever and ever and ever.
Right.
So it's not the same. Yeah.
So a few things struck me from your talk. First, I don't know if I've heard any Jewish person admit that they've struggled. They don't talk to me about it. I don't know if you've ever had people come to you. So has anyone else in the Jewish community ever, now that you're giving this talk, ever come up to you and said, I struggled too at a certain point with Christianity or with Messianic Judaism?
So, bear in mind, again, up until a year ago, or no, I did this talk for Jews for Judaism a couple years ago, nobody knew. Nobody even knew this about me, right? I had this, and then this happened, and then, okay, maybe my wife did, but my parents didn't know, my parents still don't know, right? So, that this is not something that people knew about. But I remember there was one talk, there was a couple of interactions, and this guy once at shul, he came up to me, I think we had met once or twice, and we spoke, and he said something about, it came up, and he said, I believe in Jesus. And it was just like totally out of field. And I said, let's talk. This was like Saturday morning, right after shul. And I remember we spoke right up until mincha time. We were debating and whatever. And I remember at the end of it, he says, okay, you've knocked my belief down 20%.
Okay.
I don't know what happened to this guy since then. It was a strange thing. But like I said, nobody knew about this. He happened to engage and I volunteered. But what I'll say is I interacted with a lot of people online on the internet. And that's where everything happens, right? That's where I found this YouTube thing, this YouTube video that changed my entire trajectory, right? That's where most missionary activity, so to speak, takes place. It doesn't take place people knocking on your door sometimes, but it's the internet. That's where people are. That's our social life. All the more so now with COVID, but that's really the reality.
I want to get there because I think that's one of the really important themes of your talk is the things that you can find on the internet that you don't talk to anybody about, sort of in the loneliness of life.
Right.
You run across things that they brought you into a depression, and you had suicidal thoughts, but you never even talked to anybody else about it. And I think we find the same stories with a whole bunch of different fads, and I mean, it almost reminded me of the jihad experience. These European white Christian kids that are corrupted into jihadism only by internet sites. But I want to get there. But before I do, I just want to say I think it is very good to have you speaking about this publicly, and that it does take a lot of courage for someone to get up here and say, there were 2 years of my life when I believed in Christianity, or at least some parts of Christianity, and to admit that, and you say it's some shame, and you still haven't really talked about it fully. You don't realize it, but I think you're doing a tremendous service just being public about that. Because you never know who might be watching a video once we post this, and you might be helping them, just let them know that their struggle is okay and normal, and maybe that you might be someone willing to engage with that person.
Well, for sure, I'm happy to do that. And that's, like I said, that's why I do this. It's so uncomfortable for me to I love public speaking, right?
Right.
It's actually something I enjoy, except for like this. It's so uncomfortable, it's so personal.
Right.
I don't like it. And so in that sense, I share this because there were resources out there. Like I said, I'll plug Jews for Judaism again, Rabbi Blumenthal. But the reality was there weren't people I could talk to.
That's
because
right.
Nobody understood, because the rabbi I could talk to couldn't really, and no fault of his own, he wasn't familiar or fluent in this topic, right? I couldn't talk to a therapist because they weren't fluent with, and that's not to say I didn't, and I did see therapists, and I spent a small fortune seeing these people. I sort of glossed over that, but the reality is for no fault of their own,
This was a theological issue for you. It wasn't psychological.
Exactly.
So what good was a therapist?
Yeah, I felt that way.
You can go online and find thousands and thousands of missionaries talking about how to re-explain the Jewish scriptures in a way that validates Christianity.
Right.
But you can't find anywhere near as many who have a story like yours saying, this was something I struggled with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not crazy. It's something that I really struggled with from a reasonable point of view. And this is my experience. So I just want to say, I think it's great that you're out there publicly speaking about this. And I hope you continue to do so.
Thank you.
Because I think we don't really know. Just like nobody knew what you were doing, what you were watching. We don't know what our kids are watching up there, and maybe they'll come across your video now as they browse through these things.
Right.
So I don't know if those here caught on to what resonated about the dangers of like those dark corners of the internet, and what people are exposed to and don't talk to anybody else about. What's something you learned?
I'm sorry, I want to just interrupt to answer your question earlier, that I had connected with many, many people online all around the world who went through a very similar struggle as me. And many Christians who converted. I remember once debating, she was extremely respectful.
Christians who converted to Judaism?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's what often happens here, because like I said, there's something about, the more you delve into Judaism, the people who are sincerely looking here, I think will consistently see, what the reality of what here, a reality of what these texts are showing. And this is what you see. Like I said, it's not even it's not a debate. Contemporary Christian scholars don't believe it's a debate. So there's not a debate here in the bigger picture. But when you're in this sort of little milieu, it feels like that. It feels like there's nothing else in the world beyond this.
Right.
So that's one. But two is that there is an increasing trend, at least in my experience, of Christians to reconnect with the Christian, with the Jewish foundations of their faith. Right, they want to understand what it's about. Who is, cut away the Christmas and the Saturnalia and other sort of the Roman, influences. Right. What's the core of it? And so that's why you see a lot of these even Messianic churches, and some of whom now the guy, the pastor, he leaves and becomes a Hindhoek rabbi or whatever. So, but there was one person, I remember, debating very politely, and this individual lived in Australia. And was, I wouldn't say a missionary, a non-Jew, Gentile non-Jew, extremely, took her religion very seriously. And I remember thinking, this is a very smart person. This person, like I said, is not a troll. This person was engaging in real good faith. I later find out this person converted to Judaism. And this was like one of the most hardcore Christian apologists or Christian ambassadors for their faith online, and it was an interesting, and I know others, many stories, and because this is being public, I don't want to be more specific, but the stories and yes, Jews for Judaism, they receive messages around the world on a daily basis now from people who are saying, wow, I was this, and I watched your videos, and now this, and there's something happening here which has never happened before.
So, what do you wish, given sort of the dangers of the internet and where it took you at that point in your life, what do you wish someone would have said to you or done for you that could have helped you in that moment, if anything? Here you were, I think, a vulnerable young adult, and you had been taken advantage of. Just by this particular movement, but it could have been, you could be up here telling a story of how something else on the internet took hold of your conscience and brought you to a low place. So where was the failure, either of the Jewish community, of the synagogue, or is this just part of the general failure of the internet in being a place where ideas are controlled at all?
That's a very good question. I've never been asked that before. I think, now that I think about it, like I said, I've never even considered that. It's funny because the way I thought, and I continue to judge favorably, said, well, a rabbi would not have known this because it's not like your bailiwick and so on and so on. I would say if there was one failing, so to speak, and I wouldn't even put this on anybody, but I would say this is something that I think is that, sometimes I think in life if someone comes to us with a problem, we're happy to help, right? Someone comes to us, they have an issue, they need to borrow money, they need help moving, whatever it is. Yeah. Someone comes to us, and we're happy to help. If we're not, then I suppose we should. But I think that we often don't, and I speak to myself, that we don't often seek out opportunities to help. In other words, were there people who could have proactively sought me out? I don't mean a random stranger. I mean a friend, even an acquaintance, a spiritual leader, somebody who I had a relationship with, and basically said, like, how you doing, right? What's going on with you? And I think, of course, I wouldn't have said that hey, how's it, seeing guy Monday morning, or how was your weekend? I don't mean in a superficial way like that, but I mean really in the Jewish community, I think that we need to seek out, the people who are not even isolated. I was a guy who didn't look isolated. I wasn't a little old lady who I was a guy who was 21 years old, who was going to social events and going to Torah classes and going to shul. Right. I was the last person. But you're saying nobody
ever asked you, when all of those events, all the programs you went to, nobody ever asked you how you're doing. And not in a superficial way. I mean in a...
Right. I wouldn't say never, but I would say I would say probably there could have been a lot more. I would say that, like, in retrospect, it's very, like I said, a very good question, because not that these people I would have expected to be, gurus and experts on this topic, but I think that, a big part of it was just feeling, because like you said, I felt completely and utterly alone in a way that words can't describe. So, and yet I was, like I said, if you looked at me, I looked like a super popular, socially active guy, But I think that that's where someone just really, so to speak, putting their arm around me with what's up, let's talk. I don't think that happened.
Right.
And that's interesting. And I think that perhaps this is a failure on everybody's part. And especially here we are, it seems only appropriate with COVID, whatever. These issues are becoming probably only more, and again, COVID is not going to be hopefully here forever, but this is, I think, only more exacerbated now, right? We're behind screens. It's harder and harder and weirder to engage with people. And if COVID is 1 year or 2 years or whatever it is, I think that we have to, as individuals, that's probably the lesson, is that we have to seek out opportunities to help people, even the last people we ever would have thought.
Right. Because regardless of, I know you're here to talk about your journey, but, and specifically with Christianity, with the missionary.
Right.
But this is a much bigger talk than that. It's a talk about somebody who was brought to a state of personal crisis and despair, which I don't think a lot of people really, I didn't expect that from this talk. I wouldn't expect that from this theme. You sort of think of religion as a thought experiment, not a crisis that can bring someone to the point of a collapse. And yet it did for you, and it could have been anything. And part of what contributed to it was that nobody really cared to see how you were doing. That part of, I think, a challenge that, you're right, exists in the world of COVID to a greater degree, where we're more concerned with what's going on in our own, we're nervous about our own affairs. Our instinct is to build thicker walls around us, protect ourselves, and nobody's checking in on the people who are vulnerable. But here's somebody like you who was vulnerable, and nobody really checked in on him through a difficult time.
It was interesting, and like I said, just to reiterate the point, nobody would have ever conceived of it. It's not like, that guy, you really should have, nobody in a million years would have known. And I think that's an interesting point. I never really thought of before. But yeah, I suppose the lesson for us is to, and again, this was, to reiterate, this is 2007, 2008, 2009. This is a period when smartphones really were not, our eyes weren't glued to smart. We were not, I think, as digitally connected even over the last dozen years as we are today. I don't see in COVID, but it's only going to get more and more and more like that. And so I can only imagine if that was like that today. It's scary. I can't even conceive of what I would have done, how I would have thought, what would have been going on in my life if that was happening in this life right now, this environment. That's a scary thought.
So just a couple more questions for me, and then if anyone else has questions, I'll open it up, including people online if they want to ask questions. How do you today relate to missionaries and messianism? Do you think that they are dangerous? Do you think that they are preying on our youth through online channels? And I mean, I just saw there was somebody, Bathurst and Lawrence, who was also launching a campaign. But I don't know how many people actually take those people seriously. It's often somebody who's mentally unwell, singing songs, and they don't seem to be gathering any momentum.
That's not usually
Right. So how dangerous are they? How do you think we ought to relate to missionaries today? Because part of what I try and do is just ignore. I just respect them for believing what they believe. We believe what we believe, and it's a free world, and free exercise of religion is part of a pillar of Canadian democracy. So I'm not going to spend my time attacking them, but they should equally respect us for believing what we believe. Or do you see them as more subversive in their tactics and approach?
So, first of all, I mean, you raise an important point, because it's very hard. You could spend hours and hours talking about the different schisms within Christianity, 2 billion people, right? You have Christians who believe that Jesus was a normal man who died and nothing. You believe, even within, Christianity, you have various streams, Protestant versus Orthodox versus, Catholic, which each believe, doesn't mean every Catholic and every Protestant, but they each believe that they possess the absolute immutable truth, right? Catholicism, I should say, believes that the Pope and the Vatican are this tradition of godliness in the world and the teacher. There are Protestants who call who call the Pope the whore of Babylon, right? Papist claptrap, right?
Right.
So they can't even understand, agree on that. So, but I would say that, so in other words, I've cast a pretty wide, umbrella over what is it? There's something like 30,000 sects just within Protestantism, right? So you can't even begin to wrap your head around. So, we can't sort of say that. But, so I would say is one thing, how should we relate as individuals? When I say they, anybody who seeks to convert Jews, and there was a quote,
but that's not my question. My question is, how do
okay, fine.
are you angry at them?
So it depends on the person, but what I would say,
No, as an organization, when you drive by, the City of David synagogue on Young Street, a Messianic synagogue, are you angry when you drive by?
So I would say,
you think they ruined your life? 2 years of your life.
You know what I think? I think I draw a parallel between them and the BDS movement. People often ask, I used to be the,
from your former career.
Exactly.
Right.
Used to run Husband Fellowships. People would ask me all the time, is BDS anti-Semitic, right? The boycott movement. I would say as follows. The people who run it know better. The people, and again, some, whatever. The people who are the BDS leaders, they know what they're doing. They're not seeking some equitable change. They're trying to destroy Israel, right? The people who are, the leaders of these Messianic churches, they know damn well that's not what it says. They know damn well. They believe in it for whatever reason. They believe, Christianity because, Jesus helped them get through a drug addiction or whatever it was. But they know that when they're preaching that verse X means Y, that's dishonest. There's no way around it. It's not like, if they're teaching it, like you said, in a Lahavdil Talmudic way, well, that's what that meant, but we interpret it this way as a spiritual guidance for our life. Shkoya, great, fine. But when they interpret these leaders as, Isaiah was talking about Jesus when he meant the suffering servant, that is a lie, right? But that is very different than the ignoramuses, or many people, and that's a harsh term, I don't mean that. But, so you can have people who are passing literature on the street who are in ignoramus.
Right.
People who don't really know anything, they're sort of regurgitating the same thing. But I think that in the same way you have well-meaning people who genuinely believe it's a mitzvah to save Jews from hell, right? Just like you have people, the BDS movement, again, not to sort of get off, but it's the same idea, is that they genuinely believe that, like, Israel's doing bad stuff, and if we boycott it, it will stop doing bad stuff. They believe they're genuinely doing a good thing here, right? But the leaders of the BDS movement are smarter. They know that there's an agenda that they're not telling, and the leaders of these Messianic churches that are pushing, again, I don't know the leaders of particular, churches, but, when they're pushing this agenda, they're pushing these proof texts, when they're quoting the guy in that video, this means this, he knows damn well it doesn't.
So for you, there's anger maybe at the leadership, at the
100%.
the upper echelons, but you sort of pity when you see the people on the street.
I'll give you another example.
They're just, in your mind, they're people who drank the Kool-Aid, but they're not doing so maliciously. They've been brought to this through manipulation or
not even necessarily manipulation. They could just be regular. It's interesting. In Israel, you have something like 10,000 Israeli Jews have become Messianic Christians over the last 20 years or whatever. And a huge percentage of them are Jews from the former Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Now, what characterizes Jews from the former Soviet Union is they had, for about 80 years, complete they were cut off from everything Jewish. You couldn't have a Seder, Natan Sherez, you couldn't do anything Jewish, you'd be thrown to the gulags, you'd be thrown in jail, whatever happened, right? So those are the Jews who, they were Jewishly ignorant, no fault of their own. They come from a tradition where, where many Russian Jews, even today, 20 years after 30 years after the Soviet Union collapsed, they're still Jewishly ignorant because there was this, it's hard, you can't just fix that overnight, right? The Berlin Wall falls, and the next day, everybody, just completely, runs to the, to synagogue. It's not like that, right? They were cut off for 3-4 generations, and I think that's why we see so many Russian Jews as an illustrative example who have fallen into this, because it's not that they were hoodwinked, it's not that they're stupid. I know you didn't say that, but it's not that they're stupid. It's not, I wouldn't even say manipulated or Kool-Aid. These are just genuinely, many of them seeking people, for whatever reason, drove them to this, but that they're genuine. I would say the defining characteristic of these people, I was one of them, is that we were ignorant. We were ignorant of Judaism, Jewish thought, Jewish practice, Jewish belief, Torah. We were people who, and I was one, and the others I know were like the same. And so this is what I want to say as well, is that they are taking, I think there's a question, they were, so to speak, the missionaries, Messianic Judaism is taking advantage, so to speak, of our ignorance, right? In other words, I'm basically walking around ignorant, so you tell me, hey, did you know this? I'll give you an example. When I was in first year university, right on Wellington Street, where Parliament Hill is right downtown, I remember my first year I saw a big sign. I forgot what the sign says, right across from the Supreme Court. And it's a big quote from the book of Ecclesiastes. And I remember driving when I was like first year university thinking, Ecclesiastes, why are they having some, Christian book here? This is supposed to be a secular state. That's
You didn't know, right.
Right. In other words, I knew so little. I didn't even know what a book of Jewish Bible was, non-Jewish Bible. I didn't know anything. I remember first year there was a girl on my floor. This is when the Passion of the Christ came out. And she said, Rom, everybody's talking about the Passion of the Christ. If I get this movie, I'm curious if you want to watch it with me and I want to know what you think about it. Right? This was a secular person just asking, what is it? Is it really anti-Semitic? If you remember Mel Gibson, right? Is it really anti-Semitic? When you think about it. And at the beginning, it had a quote from Isaiah about the suffering servant. I remember watching this thinking okay, they're quoting some Christian scripture. Quoting Isaiah, I knew nothing, right? And again, I think many of us don't, I think we all can do more. There's never been more information in the world as accessible to us as right now, especially with Zoom. We don't have to get off our comfy couches. There's never in a million years been the opportunity to learn this. And I think for me, even though there was a lot of, I put the cart before the horse, right? I was practicing, I was a practicing Jew, and I was trying to learn more. But the reality is that I still didn't know very much. I was building this big, beautiful home, right, of mitzvot and belief, or a mitzvot and practice, which is a big part of Judaism. But I wasn't filling it with the same knowledge that I should have. And so, no, you need knowledge, right? You can't just have knowledge and do nothing with it, right? To study Torah. The idea why studying Torah is so important is it's supposed to make us a better person, right? Torah's Chaim. It's supposed to be not a book from the Iron Age. It's supposed to have real instruction for life, how to make our lives better, how to make our, our families, our marriages, our relationships, our work life, our parenting, everything, every element of our life, how to be a kinder, gentler, more, giving, sensitive person. That's what it's about. Right. So you're supposed to, reading the Torah and studying for 10 hours a day and being just a horrible jerk human being, there's something missing there. But also doing all these mitzvahs and being a horrible jerk, there has to be both. Or doing all the mitzvahs, but being completely ignorant isn't good either. And that's why on Sukkot, as we think of it, we bring these all together, right? We have, one element of the Arba Minim, it has a smell, but it has no taste, right? So, it represents some Jews who have action, but no knowledge. We have other, it has a smell, but no taste, and the taste, no smell. So Jews have knowledge and no mitzvahs, and mitzvahs and no knowledge. But we bring it all together with the etrog, which has both a taste and a smell, to represent sort of those, parts of us which have both the actions and the knowledge, is that ultimately we're all together, we're all one family. You have to bring it together, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't all strive to not only continue to do more, but continue to know more as well. And I think that was the biggest inoculation, the biggest vaccine, right? That would have been there for me, and I didn't know anything.
The danger, of course, in knowing more is one of my great frustrations with the internet is when you type in a Jewish topic, you'll have Chabad as the first answer on Google,
right,
if you're lucky.
Right.
Or if not, you'll have one of these messianic sites. They are very, very strong with their internet presence. And it's one of my frustrations about messianism is how much they've taken advantage of freedom of the internet to get their material and their platform out there. It's very, very scary. I even sometimes will be searching for something online, and it will take me, I'll have to read down the page before the final line is something like, and this proves why so-and-so is the Messiah. It's really scary. So look, there's a broader discussion to be had here about the internet as a free-for-all of information and how some people use that to take advantage. But I have one last question for you. It might be too personal, so I'm okay if you don't answer it. But this is how you came here and you came here and you brought this up at the beginning.
Okay.
What it was like growing up celebrating Christmas with your dad.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, what's your relationship like with your dad? How have you ever talked to him about this? And how does he view your journey?
He doesn't know about this. Like I said, my mother doesn't either. That's why when I say we're half jokingly they're watching, like, I'm sort of 80-90% joking, but not quite.
Right.
My father doesn't know how to use it. So that's why he's not. But it's weird, that he has been completely. So what he has seen was a secular kid, and he's not Jewish. And he's not only not Jewish, he's like totally not Jewish. He lives out in the country, right? And none of my family is Jewish, and I have cousins, and over here and over here, and like it's not like. These aren't like, it's extremely, when I say non-Jewish, my father grew up in Peterborough. My mother was one of the first Jews he ever met, right? This is really like, very, let's say non-Jewish. Like,
but your father celebrates Christmas. It's not just that he's not Jewish.
Correct. No, correct.
This is Christian. You have a big part of your family that's Christian.
Yeah,
so
how do you relate to that's what I meant to say. Yeah.
How do you relate to your family that's Christian?
So I should say my father is not Christian. I would call my father agnostic. I don't know what he is. He celebrates Christmas.
He celebrates Christmas culturally.
Right. He's remarried. So he's married to a Catholic lady, a lovely Catholic lady. Again, not particularly, but religious. But he is somebody who I don't know. So how does he relate? Just as my father.
What's your relationship with him? Are you guys?
It's very good. It's very good.
Okay.
No, it's very good, very close. Very close, good relationship with my father. And he's been totally. I remember years ago, there was an event there was like sort of the work thing that I went to. Sort of hard to get into it, whatever. And I remember I was wearing a baseball cap. I said, you want me to like? I was wearing a keep at the time. He said, no, take the hat off, wear the keep, it's fine, And so there was one event too. I remember I was benching. I went to an event. This was at a time when I wasn't. He brought me to a gala, and there was non-Jewish food, but of course I benched after. Because this is sort of where I was. I was sort of doing one thing and another. And I remember I brought my sitter. I didn't have a little bench. I brought my whole sitter, and I'm benching. And there was one of my dad's colleagues or whatever. I said, "Oh, well, what's he doing?" And he said, "Oh, he's thanking God for the prayer, And he was like so proud of me, right? So he has a very good, I think, very accepting relationship of me, which is not often the case with Jewish parents, right? And there's a reason for that. And I think that Jewish parents, they see as a rejection. This is how you're supposed to be a Jew, right? You're supposed to do, You're supposed to be more Jewish than that, but not like that, and like this, and not like that, right? And I think all parents have a particular understanding of how you're supposed to, how it's supposed to be.
But that's why I think now that you're an adult,
right?
You're providing actually at the end of this conversation a really good model of mutual respect for very different beliefs. So I think it's important to be clear and say you're not here to trash Christianity.
No.
And say why Judaism is right. You're just here, I think, to raise awareness that what happens when we don't respect each other's beliefs, and when one group comes after somebody else sort of aggressively to try and use their own psychology against them to have them believe something subversive.
Right. I certainly would say, listen, it's definitely part of my talk that the Christian claims are incompatible with Judaism, that Jesus is not the Jewish Messiah, that the teachings of Christianity are not.
For you.
No, Ahmed, it's not for me. It's not, right? It's not like when they point to the Hebrew Bible, it means this. It doesn't mean X, Y, or Z, depending on sort of how you're feeling or whatever. It means could mean multiple different things, could mean different meanings. But pointing to this quote in Isaiah does not mean that Jesus was the Messiah. Right? You can't sort of put any, because I think that's what we often see is we often say, okay, I'll put my own belief into this text, which is a mistake that I think all people do when they're reading any religious text. But it doesn't mean that it means everything and it means nothing. It has a meaning, and it has a primary meaning, and it has a meaning that the original writers intended. And that is what Jews have said for centuries, millennia, and that is what the vast majority of Christian scholars contend as well. So like I said, so when we point, and I barely didn't even get into these texts, they're inconsistent, they're vague, they're ambiguous, they're unclear. They'll point to one text, which if you read it one particular way can support theirs, but you see 7 or 8 other verses which in a much more direct fashion in the context of what the Jews are claiming say the complete opposite. So in other words, when you actually sort of examine the text, like 300, vague and ambiguous texts, divorced from their context, it's still 300 bad arguments, right? There's maybe a handful we can have a real discussion about. But again, the vast majority of Christian contemporary scholars also don't believe it either. They say, listen, that's not what it means. They believe in their faith for any reason, and that's, I think, the difference. Is I would say if somebody, believes in a particular faith for any reason, that's fine, but don't claim that it is the spiritual successor to Judaism. One can believe for whatever reason they want, but that to claim that he was the Jewish Messiah based on the Jewish criteria, and again, it's not just about that he's a Messiah. They don't just believe, this isn't just that we say he's not and they say he is. They have an entirely different job description of what the Messiah is supposed to be. The Jews don't believe that he was a guy who was supposed to be God himself, God in the flesh, who would die, and you have to believe in him. Very different description of who it is. It's not just we believe it's going to be somebody else who we believe is going to die, and we're going to resurrect. We're going to believe it. It's very different. So again, they can believe in that for a variety of reasons, just as Hinduism and Mormonism can, and whatever. But like I said, I think it is important. I wouldn't want to give people the impression that you could believe that the Hebrew Bible is full of 300 proof texts. It's not, right?
This is maybe where you and I are different. I'm more hesitant to say, this is what it means, and what you say it means is wrong. I'm much more, this is what it means for me. I'm a Jew. This is the way my tradition interprets the text. And I respect you for your tradition and the way your tradition interprets it. But I don't go to churches and preach why you're wrong and why you need to join us. And I respect, and I would expect the same thing from you, that you don't go after our young people, use what they value, what they consider sacred, to manipulate really what they believe to bring them over to your side. But I know this is
no, but I just wanted to say I would agree in theory, as a practical sense, I would agree with that. In other words, practically speaking, we're not I'm not out there to sort of, I don't care that I'm not out there to dissuade believing Christians from believing Christianity. I am happy to. Right? Maimonides, the Rambam, 1,000 years ago said, it is prior to Christianity and Islam, right? The world was polytheist, and it was Christianity and Islam, which 2/3 of the world, 60% of the world now believes in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that's a very good thing, right? I wouldn't seek to have people walk away from that. So to become an atheist and not believe it at all. But I would just believe the difference there is that in a practical sense, yes. As far as interfaith dialogue, whatever, yes. But their response to what you said is, hey, stop picking, somebody asked, stop picking on our youth, is they would say, but Rabbi, they would say the same thing, Rabbi, this isn't a matter of let's respect our youth. This proof text does mean that Jesus is your Messiah. And so they would say they believe they're duty bound to snatch our youth and all of us from hell. They believe they're doing a mitzvah. So I think for those people who believe that we need to engage with them in a real, I wouldn't say gloves off, but I would say we have to be real about that. And I think to say, no, listen, it doesn't mean everything to all people, right? If a guy looks and says, oh, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that means I should buy a Chrysler. You can't just, point
Right.
So in other words, yes, it's a matter of practicality. I would agree. Listen, that's a good point. But they would say, no, Rabbi, this means something to us. They would reject that premise.
Of course, I understand.
Right, and so they would say, we're going to reject the premise that we're not going to come after your people because we believe we're duty bound. We're doing a mitzvah to do it. And so that's why I think we have to engage, with them and say, leave us alone, because that's not going to happen. Say, leave us alone, but leave us alone because, what you're claiming, not Christianity is wrong, but your claim that the Hebrew Bible says A, B, C is not accurate.
Okay, you and I could go at this all night, but I want to ask if there's any questions from anyone who's here or anyone online. If you want to ask a question, just type in the chat box. Yes, just repeat. We're going to repeat the question so those online can hear.
So the turning point for you was when you were really bothered by the idea that God would fool the Jewish people at this point where Jesus comes into the picture, and they're blinded, and then they choose the wrong thing. They don't go along with Jesus. That was incomprehensible to you.
It was one of the three, right? One was just very briefly was the proof text, going through the proof text and just those falling apart. 2 was what you said about, just for those who couldn't hear, about basically God sort of fooling the Jewish people is the second part. And the third part was essentially reevaluating the whole thing, which was, let's get out of this whole, about the proof text, this text, and let's say, just epistemologically, how do we know what we know? They believe that we know what we know because at some point, the Jewish people were trustworthy transmitters of God's word.
So I wanted to ask about that specific point where you didn't like the God had fooled the Jews. So what about looking at it the other way, that people that went on towards Christianity, you then have millions more people that would not be fooled. Would not be full of God. So we have that as well.
So it's an interesting, for those who didn't hear, what's your name, sir?
But
Batya asked, for those who didn't, how do we explain, okay, God fooled the Jewish people, according to, that's what bothered you, according to that belief, but what about all the Christians in the world? They, there's 2 billion of them, they must have been fooled too. So I wouldn't say, I don't think any Jew really believes that a Christian has been fooled. I think Jews, and Judaism believes that, they have a share in the world to come. Right, that everybody does, right? That everybody, I think that's the difference. No, listen, I would also say the majority of evangelical Christians today believe there are multiple paths to heaven. According to a Pew survey, most interesting organization in the world, Pew, P-E-W, it's an organization based in Washington, D.C., and they do religious polling. How many Muslims in the United States? How many Muslims in the world? What do Catholics believe about same-sex marriage? The most interesting polls, it really is so interesting about what Jews believe and how Jews vote, how often they go. It's so interesting stuff. They do tons and tons of polling. It's a non-religious organization. Pew, like, in a church, right? Not like Pew, right. So, in other words, so what they found, I remember years ago, among evangelical, right? Not like mainstream, the majority of people today, majority of Christians, if you took 100 people who are self-described as Christians in this country, most don't go to church. Most don't believe you burn in hell forever. The vast majority do not believe in that central tenet of Christianity, which is you need to have this particular belief system in order to be achieve atonement. They don't believe that. And the majority, even of evangelicals, who are like the most kind of fire and brimstone people you think of, don't believe that. It's 59% think that. Why? Because it's hard for them, and this survey posited, it's hard to believe everybody's going to hell when you actually meet other people. It's very easy to say that when you burn heretics at the stake. But all of a sudden you've got a Muslim neighbor and a Jewish coworker and and this and that. All of a sudden it's like he's a good person. And maybe he believes in God. Maybe he's a super religious person and he's going to hell forever and ever and ever because he believes. So I think that majority of them have I think. We know the majority of them, at least in North America, I'm sure even more so Canada, don't have bought that. But so in other words, I would say I don't necessarily accept the premise that they've been fooled. In other words, that for them it might be true. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we believe he's the Messiah, he died for sins. What it means, I don't believe they've been hoodwinked. According to, like I said, Maimonides, that again, that if you're asking me how I would interpret, well, why are there 2 billion Christians and 1.9 billion Muslims, right, in the world, is that first of all, 70% of the world is not Christian, but I think the reality is that we believe that that's been a path for them to come closer to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? That the entire world was not going to accept Judaism. We have not sought to convert the entire world. In fact, for the Book of Ruth, there's a practice to turn away converts 3 times. It's not easy to convert to Judaism. Anybody who has tried will attest to that, and those who have will certainly attest to that as well. So, in other words, this isn't that I believe that they believe a path that is not true for Jews, but that perhaps God has put in front of them to become closer to God Almighty. Same way for Muslims, right? In other words, I think it's a lot easier for me to explain that because I don't believe they're going to hell. I believe Christians will have a share in the world to come. Muslims have a share in the world to come. Baha'is have a share in the world to come. And Sikhs have a share in the world to come. I think that's the major difference about you. Whereas if you genuinely believe this, and believe that my way or the highway, you really have a real, it's not just a hard to stomach belief. It's like a real theological belief. Theodicy, bad things happen to good people. You have to believe that God, who created the heavens and the earth, is going to throw the vast majority of people into hell forever and ever and ever and ever. And that's not to say the vast majority of Christians believe it either, right? So I think the difference is that we don't really believe the corollary that they're wrong and totally, yes, I believe that they have elements of their theology which is based incorrectly. Much as they would believe about Muslims would believe about us. Except everybody believes everybody, right? We're all sort of looking at this at this thing from different angles, right? We're all looking at a Rorschach test and interpreting it in different ways. But again, the difference is they're not just saying this is our belief, and trying to understand it. They're saying this is your belief. That's, I think, a major distinction. So again, I don't want to have sort of just go on and on here, but then I think the major difference is that they say, how could God do that to the Jewish people? One, because they agree and we agree that God had a special covenant with the Jewish people that would never be immuted forever and ever, according to God's word, which in theory would be never changed forever and ever, which according to that they believe also. So that's one. Two is they believe, unlike us, that non-believers who get the theology wrong will be burned in hell forever and ever. We don't believe that. So one is we don't believe that God changes his word because he said he wouldn't change his word. If he said he changes his word, then you can't believe anything. So if God said, I'll never change my word, and then changes his word, then how do you believe anything he says in the first place? He's just tricks for God. You can't believe anything he says. That's one. Two is unlike this particular belief, we do not believe that they're utterly wrong and that they're not going to heaven as well. Does that clarify? You look unsatisfied.
Yeah, I think it's more complicated than that. There is inherent to Judaism an idea that everyone else got it wrong. At least that's what I was brought up with.
Well, to some degree, that's true. We do believe that Jesus. No. It's not to say that we believe. That's not to say that when I say it's right for them. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. Is there?
Objective reality, and I believe objective reality is real or it's not. You can't say they're competing things, but they all.
I wouldn't say. So objective reality is Jews would say Jesus did not die for our sins. They have that wrong. That's true. The book of Zechariah in their Bible says at the end of days, 10 men will come and grab the cloak of the Jews saying, take us with you, for we know God is with you. If the Jews are wrong, I don't see how that's going to happen, right? They believe that at the end of days, the world, according to their Bible, at the end of days, the Gentile nations will come to the Jews saying, teach us. We know that you're wrong, right? We know that we were wrong and that you were right. So just because we were right does not mean that they were wrong in the sense of, yes, is Jesus the Messiah according to Judaism? No. Did he die for our sins? No. That is incorrect. That's true, that we would believe that faith, that belief is incorrect. But it doesn't mean that they have been doing something wrong. In the same way, I'll draw not a perfect analogy. We would say, are we allowed to eat rice on Passover? Right? Sephardi Jews, absolutely. Ashkenazi Jews, no. Right? It's the same people, same laws. You're both right, but you can't do the other thing. Right? So again, I don't fully, it's not a perfect analogy because Jews, of course, don't believe, yes, for you, Jesus is the Messiah. And if for Christians, they can use that as a way to get to God, yes, we do believe that they have that wrong. But you know what? They also believe that 70% of the world is wrong for not believing it. No religion in the world has ever gotten more than 30% of the belief. And if you split up Christianity, it's like 15%, right? So no matter how you slice it back here, every religion in the world says that the vast majority of people are wrong. Jews say that 99% of the people, Christians say that 85% of the people, Muslims say that everybody says the vast majority are wrong. So I think no matter how we slice it, the majority of people in the world are going to say most people are wrong. The difference is for us, we're saying, yes, it's true. Your central core, what we would say your central core is that you believe in God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You're right about that. You are 100% right. That yes, you are wrong about the role of Jesus in this theology, but you know what? We believe you are pursuing that, and God did that, so you can come closer to God. And there's no punishment for them. They are rewarded for that. So it's true. It's not the right and wrong at the same time. But and I think there is a possibility if we sort of look even within Judaism that what's right for you is not right for you, right? In Judaism, men have different commandments, women have different commandments. Jews have different. Are we allowed to eat pork? We're not allowed to eat pork according to Judaism. My father eats a big pork loin. There's nothing wrong with that. So, is it wrong to eat pork? Yes or no? It's not a yes or no, right? Yes, it's wrong for me. No, it's not wrong for him. Is it idolatry for me? Yes. Is it idolatry for him? No. But listen, we have not, and I think the proof in the pudding, Vach, is we haven't stopped to convert the world, right? Even in times when we had the ability to have free, proselytization of Judaism, is that we believe that there is a role for the multiplicity of religions in the world. That's totally fine because every religion in the world acknowledges the vast majority of people in the world.
It's a good question.
Yeah,
It's a complicated question. But I just want to add what I think is really interesting about Rob's story is what initially attracted him, if you could use that word, to Messianism, was the threat of being punished for not having the right belief. And that was also the reason why he left. Because those neighbors that he talked about, if I could get into your subconscious, that's his mother. So the idea that I could be saved, but my mother
It's
would
always
be
back to the mother,
burning.
isn't it?
Well, no, but half of my family would be going to hell. Is the very thing that attracted him working against him. I thought that was really interesting in his story.
I'm
That
happy to continue.
the weakness becomes the strength, and it shows you the fallacy of that point.
And I
right?
think that, but I don't want to gloss over that the consequence is significant here. That according to Jews, yes, you might not have the whole theology right, Christians, but you have a place in the world to come because you're doing what you're supposed to be.
Right.
Whereas here, you got it wrong.
It's a big difference. The Judaism doesn't believe that we have the truth and it's our job to make everybody else Jewish. Right? I'm not saying we also believe that everything goes, but it's a big difference between that and a religion that says there's punishment if you don't accept this one principle of faith. I want to thank you for a really interesting night and a really interesting conversation. And just again, thank you for being courageous enough to talk about this openly. I think people who have struggles, it's so easy to just hide it in your history. But for the sake of the people who are going to watch this video or who heard you tonight, you don't know for whom you could be doing a great deal of service and who you could be raising awareness to really help in the future.
Thank you for having
So I
me.
want to thank you and thank everybody for attending and wish you all Moadim L'Simcha. And I hope we can be together again soon and have part 2 and part 3 maybe. All right. Thanks everyone online for joining us. Wish you all a good night.